The bank teller offered her sympathies, confirming my death. I said I was still alive, gripping the landline my husband installed 40 years ago. My grandson had faked my death to steal my annuity, $215,000. But that one phone call changed everything. He forgot I'd kept that old number. What I did next taught him a lesson he'll never forget. My name is Eleanor Morrison. I'm 74 years old, a widow, and for 3 years I handed my entire financial life over to my grandson David. He managed the annuity my husband left me, the one steady stream of income that kept my lights on and my fridge full. He was the one person I never questioned. But David was building a lie so cold it required me to be dead for it to work. What unraveled from that single phone call exposed a betrayal I never saw coming, and a lesson he will carry for the rest of his life. I met Arthur Morrison in the summer of 1968. He was a quiet man with calloused hands and a laugh that filled a room. We married that November, built a life on a single income from the assembly line at the Ford plant, raised 2 daughters, and paid off this house on Oakwood Drive by 1985. Arthur installed that landline in the kitchen himself, the same beige rotary phone that still hangs on the wall. He said we'd never need one of those new cordless gadgets because this one would outlast us both. He was right about everything except the most important part. Arthur died on a Tuesday in March of 2020. Not from the virus, though that was everywhere. A heart attack while shoveling snow. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. 48 years of marriage ended in the time it took me to make a pot of coffee. After the funeral, when the casseroles stopped coming and the cards stopped arriving, I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of papers I didn't understand. Arthur handled the money. Always. His pension from Ford, the savings account at First Federal, the small investment account his brother helped him open. I knew how to write a check and balance the checkbook, but the bigger picture was a language I never learned. That's when David stepped in. David was our first grandchild, the son of our oldest daughter, Sharon. He'd been a sweet boy, the kind who brought me dandelions in a fist and called them flowers. By 2021, he was 26, working at a car dealership, living in an apartment across town. After Arthur died, David started visiting more. He'd bring groceries, mow the lawn, fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom. He asked about my finances. "Grandma, are you keeping up with the bills? Do you need help with Grandpa's pension?" I was grateful. I handed him the folder with Arthur's paperwork. He spent an afternoon going through it, making phone calls, typing on his laptop. When he finished, he sat me down and explained the annuity. Arthur had rolled his Ford pension into a fixed annuity with Heritage Life Insurance. It paid me $2,300 every month for the rest of my life. Steady, reliable, enough to cover the utilities, groceries, property taxes, and a little leftover. David offered to help me manage it. "Let me set up direct deposit for you. I'll keep an eye on the account, make sure everything runs smooth." I said yes. He was my grandson. Why wouldn't I trust him? For the first 18 months, everything worked perfectly. The checks appeared in my account on the 5th of each month. David would call once a week, stopping by on Sundays for dinner. He'd bring printouts showing the account balance, explain the statements, answer questions I didn't know enough to ask. I felt safe. When my friends at church complained about their own children handling their money, I felt lucky. David had it under control. Then, in the spring of 2023, things shifted. The payments started arriving late, first by a few days, then a week, then 2 weeks. When I called David, he said the insurance company was implementing a new computer system. "It's happening to a lot of people, Grandma. Nothing to worry about. I'll call them and sort it out." He always sorted it out, until he didn't. By late summer, I'd gone 2 months without a deposit. The savings account Arthur left me was nearly empty. I was buying groceries on a credit card David had helped me open, one I didn't fully understand. I asked him about it at dinner one Sunday, and his face changed. A flicker of something I couldn't name. "They're dragging their feet," he said. "I've got a case open with the fraud department. They think someone might be trying to access the annuity. Don't worry, I'm handling it." I nodded. I was embarrassed to admit I didn't know how to check for myself. So I waited. The landline became my tether. I kept it connected even when my daughters begged me to switch to a cell phone. Sharon said I was stubborn. My younger daughter, Valerie, said I was living in the past. But that phone was Arthur's voice. I could still hear him in the sharp ring, in the way the receiver felt against my ear after he'd hung up from a call with his brother. Every Tuesday, I dusted it. Every night, I checked that the cord wasn't tangled. It was a habit I couldn't break. On a quiet Tuesday morning in early October, it rang at 10:15. I was at the kitchen table doing a crossword puzzle. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar local number. I almost let it go to the answering machine, but something made me reach for the receiver. Hello? The woman's voice on the other end was soft, practiced, the voice of someone who delivers difficult news for a living. Good morning, this is Patricia from First Federal Bank. May I speak with Eleanor Morrison? This is she. There was a pause. When she spoke again, sympathy had settled into her tone like a blanket. Mrs. Morrison, I want to express our deepest condolences for your loss. I'm calling to confirm the documentation before we release the annuity proceeds to your grandson. I gripped the receiver so hard my knuckles went white. What loss? I asked. What are you talking about? Another pause, longer this time. Your death, Mrs. Morrison. We received a death certificate dated September 15th. Your grandson David submitted it along with a claim for the full annuity payout, a total of $215,000. My kitchen went silent. Even the birds outside the window seemed to stop. I looked at the phone in my hand, at the cord that had hung there for 40 years, at the husband who was no longer here but who had left me this one connection to the outside world. I'm still very much alive, I said. On the other end, Patricia from First Federal didn't speak for a long time. Then, barely a whisper. Oh my God. The silence on the line felt like a living thing. Patricia from First Federal was still there. I could hear her breathing. Mrs. Morrison, I have to freeze this account immediately. Do I have your permission? I said yes. I said it twice, just to be sure. She told me to come to the bank the next morning, to bring identification, and that she would pull all the paperwork David had submitted. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, staring at the landline. The beige phone Arthur installed in 1984. The one he said would outlast us both. It just had. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with Arthur's old coffee mug in my hands, the one he used every morning for 48 years. I thought about David as a boy, the chubby hands that placed dandelions on my lap, the same hands that had typed my name onto a death certificate. I thought about the delayed payments, the excuses, the credit card I never understood. It all lined up now like dominoes I'd refused to see falling. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be a victim in my own story. The next morning, I dressed carefully, put on the pearl earrings Arthur gave me for our 40th anniversary, and drove to First Federal Bank. Patricia met me at the door. She was younger than I'd imagined, late 40s with kind eyes and a steady voice. She led me past the teller counter into a small office, closed the door, and laid a manila folder on the desk between us. This is everything your grandson submitted, she said. I opened the folder. On top was a photocopy of a death certificate. State of Michigan, County of Wayne. Eleanor Ruth Morrison. Date of death, September 15th. Cause, cardiac arrest. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be from a doctor at Mercy General, but there is no doctor named Marcus Webb on staff at Mercy General. I know because I volunteered there for 12 years. The funeral home listed was Heritage Memorial Services, an address that turned out to be a vacant lot. David hadn't even bothered to make the forgery believable. He thought no one would check. Patricia slid another document across the desk. A change of direct deposit form, dated 6 weeks earlier. The annuity payments had been rerouted to a new account at a different bank, an account in David's name. For 2 months, the money I thought was just delayed had been landing in his pocket. I felt the blood drain from my face. There's more, Patricia said. She showed me a withdrawal history from my savings account. Small amounts at first. 500 here, 300 there, gradually increasing until the account was nearly empty. The credit card I'd been using for groceries had a balance of $11,000, charges for things I'd never bought: flights, electronics, restaurant bills. David had been bleeding me for over a year while I sat at his Sunday dinners and thanked him for his help. Patricia reached across the desk and took my hand. "We're going to stop this, but we need to be smart. If we tip him off too soon, he might run." I nodded. Arthur always said the same thing: think before you act. I drove home in a daze. The autumn leaves on Oakwood Drive were turning, the same brilliant red and gold they'd been the year Arthur died. Inside, the house felt emptier than it had in months. I went to the bedroom, to the jewelry box on my dresser. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. A small brass key, tucked beneath a velvet tray. Arthur had given it to me years ago, said it was for a safe deposit box at First Federal. Box 316. I'd never used it. He handled everything. I barely remembered it existed. But now, with the knowledge of David's betrayal fresh in my mind, I wondered if Arthur had left something there. Something he never told me about. I grabbed the key and drove back to the bank. Patricia helped me access the vault. Box 316 was in the back, a rectangle of cold metal with a keyhole that fit my key perfectly. I slid the box out onto the table, lifted the lid. Inside was a single manila envelope, thick with papers, and on top, a letter with my name in Arthur's handwriting. I sat down, hands trembling, and began to read. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means you've had reason to open this box. Maybe I'm gone. Maybe trouble found you. I've kept this secret because I needed to protect you from a threat I couldn't yet prove. For 3 years before my death, I watched David change. He started asking questions about our money, about the house, about what would happen after we were gone. He was charming, like always, but there was a hunger in his eyes I recognized. I've seen men like this on the line at Ford, men who would sell their own mother for a payout. I hired an investigator, Frank DeVito, a retired detective who owed me a favor. Frank found things I wish I could unsee. David is in deep with a woman named Tina Marchetti. She has a record: elder fraud, identity theft, 2 convictions in Ohio under a different name. Her pattern is to find men with access to vulnerable relatives and push them toward financial crimes. David is weak, and she is the steel in his spine. I was gathering proof to take to the police when my heart gave out. God had other plans. So now the proof is yours. I turned the page. The next sheet listed dates, bank records, photos of Tina and David meeting with known fraudsters, documentation of a gambling debt David owed to a man in Detroit. Arthur had been building a case file in the months before his death, just like he'd rebuilt engines in that garage. Meticulous, thorough, every bolt tightened. Beneath the investigation notes were stock certificates. Arthur had written a separate note. Bought these in 1994 when a friend started a small technology company. I forgot about them for years. Last I checked, they're worth around $340,000. They're yours, free and clear. Use them to stay independent. Don't let anyone, family or not, take what we built." Patricia looked up the stocks. The company had gone public 2 years ago. Their value now was closer to $370,000. I didn't feel elation. I felt something colder, sharper, the power to fight back. That afternoon, I called Frank DeVito. He answered on the second ring, and when I said my name, he didn't sound surprised. "Arthur said you'd call eventually. I've kept the file open. David's situation has gotten worse since the old man died. Tina's been pushing hard. The fake death certificate? That's her signature move. She did almost the exact same thing to an elderly man in Toledo 4 years ago. Frank agreed to meet me that evening. When he arrived, he brought a folder 3 inches thick. He spread photos across my kitchen table. Tina at a casino, Tina with a known forger, bank statements showing massive cash withdrawals from David's account into an offshore shell. "He's not the mastermind," Frank said, "but he's a willing participant. And if we move fast, we can catch them both before that payout clears." We worked late into the night, mapping out the timeline, gathering every scrap of evidence Patricia had frozen at the bank, cross-referencing it with Frank's files. The pattern was undeniable. David and Tina had been siphoning my annuity for 6 months, building a paper trail of lies that would have buried me if I hadn't answered that landline. But the clincher came when Frank pulled up Tina's real identity. Her name wasn't Marchetti at all. It was Nicole Vance, wanted for elder fraud in Nevada and Arizona. She'd been using David as her entry point into my life, grooming him for this moment. The $215,000 payout was her exit ticket to a non-extradition country. David was just the tool to cash it. I sat back and let the weight of it settle. My grandson wasn't just a liar. He was a co-conspirator in a scheme that would have left me penniless. My death a footnote in a fraud investigation that might never have been opened. Frank leaned forward. We have enough to take to the county prosecutor. But if you want justice, not just arrests, we need a confession. Something that makes the case airtight. I thought about it, and I remembered the landline. The same phone that had started this could end it. I asked Frank to step outside. Then I picked up the receiver and called David. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice full of false cheer. Grandma, everything okay? I kept my voice steady. Everything's fine, sweetheart. I've been doing some thinking about the house, about my finances. I'd like you to come to dinner tonight. There's something I want to discuss. He paused. I could hear someone else in the background. A woman's voice. Tina. He came back on the line, eagerness barely contained. Of course. What time? 7 o'clock. I said, I'll make your favorite. As I hung up, I looked at the landline. Arthur's phone. The one piece of old technology I refused to let go. It had already saved me once. Tonight, it would save me again. David arrived at 5 minutes past 7 with a bouquet of grocery store carnations and a smile that almost fooled me. He hugged me at the door, and I felt his arms around my shoulders, the same arms that had held dandelions as a child. You look great, Grandma, he said. Whatever you're cooking smells like heaven. It was pot roast, Arthur's favorite. The same meal I'd made 100 times while we were married. The same recipe my mother taught me when I was a girl. I led David to the kitchen, poured him a glass of wine, and stirred the gravy. He talked about work at the dealership, about a trip to Florida he was thinking about taking, about a boat he was saving up for. His lies were seamless, oiled by years of practice. I let him talk. I waited for the right moment. The one Arthur's voice in my head had been rehearsing with me all afternoon. When we sat down to eat, I brought the landline from the wall and set it on the table between the salt shaker and the gravy boat. David glanced at it, confused. What's with the ancient phone? His voice was light, but I saw a flicker of unease pass through his eyes. I've been thinking about selling the house, I said. I kept my voice calm, the way I'd spoken to frightened patients in the ICU. Downsizing, like you suggested last spring. I was looking through my finances today, and I realized there might be more money in the annuity than I thought. Has the insurance company sorted out those delays yet? David's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He recovered fast, flashed that smile again. It's almost resolved. The fraud department flagged something, but I've been on the phone with them every day. You'll have your checks by the end of the month, I promise. His hand moved toward the landline. Why is this out here? I picked up the receiver and held it toward him. Because Patricia from First Federal called me on this phone yesterday. She was very sorry for my loss. I said the words slowly, watching his face. The color drained from his cheeks like water running out of a sink. Grandma, I don't know what you're talking about. I pressed the speaker button and dialed Patricia's number from memory. She answered on the first ring, just as we'd rehearsed. Mrs. Morrison. Her voice crackled through the speaker, filling the kitchen. I'm confirming that the death certificate your grandson submitted for you has been voided. The annuity payout of $215,000 is frozen, and I have flagged his account for fraud. Would you like me to send the documentation to the police? David's glass tipped over. Wine bled across the white tablecloth. He didn't move to clean it. He just stared at the phone as Patricia's voice echoed off the kitchen walls. "I'll call you back, Patricia," I said, and hung up. I set the receiver gently on the table, like Arthur used to do after a long call with his brother. "David," I said, and for the first time in 3 years, I used the voice of a grandmother who was no longer a victim. "Explain yourself." He broke. Not into tears, not into confession, but into rage. He shoved back from the table, knocking his chair to the floor. "You don't understand," he said, his hands shaking. "I had debts, people I owed money to. Tina said this was the only way. She said you'd never even notice, that the insurance company doesn't check, that we'd be in Costa Rica before anyone asked questions." The name hung in the air like smoke. Tina. The woman Arthur had been hunting before his heart gave out. David was still talking, his voice climbing higher. "Do you know what kind of people I've been dealing with? They don't just take money, Grandma. They take fingers. Tina promised me she could make it all go away if I just signed a few papers. She said you were old anyway, that you'd had a good life, that this was just moving the timeline forward a little." He stopped, suddenly aware of what he'd said. His mouth hung open. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up, walked to the back door, and opened it. Frank DeVito stepped in from the porch, his badge from 30 years on the Detroit Force glinting on his belt, and a small digital recorder in his hand. He pressed stop. "Thanks for the confession, David," Frank said. "That makes things a lot easier." David lunged for the door, but Frank was faster. He blocked the exit with his body, a solid wall of former detective, and David crumpled into himself on the floor. He started sobbing, great gasping cries that made his shoulders heave. I didn't go to him. I stood by the table with the landline still warm in my hands. "Where is Tina now?" Frank asked. David's voice came out in a wet whisper. "The airport. She took everything. The account we set up for the siphon payments, the $80,000 we pulled from Grandma's savings. She said she was going to book the tickets. I thought I was going with her. I thought we were leaving together." Frank looked at me, something urgent passing between us. "Nicole Vance, Tina, has a pattern. When the money's secure, she cuts the partner loose and disappears. If she's at the airport, she's not waiting for him. She's running." I picked up the landline and dialed Patricia again. "Did the funds from David's account clear?" I asked her. Patricia's voice came back tight with tension. "A transfer of $83,000 left his account 45 minutes ago. The destination was a shell company in the Caribbean. We couldn't freeze it in time." I closed my eyes. $83,000. My grocery money, my property taxes, the savings Arthur had earned on an assembly line for 40 years. Gone in 45 minutes. Frank already had his cell phone to his ear, speaking in the clipped code of law enforcement. He'd called Detective Ramirez, the same detective who'd been building a case on Nicole Vance since her first fraud in Nevada. When he hung up, he said, "They're on their way to the airport. She's booked on a 6 a.m. flight to Mexico City. One way. And there's something else." He paused, and I saw the same expression I'd seen on doctors delivering impossible news. "The shell company that took the money is linked to a larger network. They've hit 6 other elderly victims in 3 states. Your annuity was just the smallest piece. If Vance escapes, she'll vanish into a non-extradition country, and every other victim loses their chance at justice." The kitchen fell quiet. David, still on the floor, looked up with an expression I couldn't place. Not guilt. Not remorse. Fear. "She'll kill me if she finds out I talked," he said. Frank knelt beside him. "She's already trying to pin this on you, son. The fake death certificate, your signature, the bank records, your name. You were the fall guy from the start." David's face cracked open, and for the first time since he'd walked through my door, I saw the boy who used to bring me dandelions. But the boy was gone, replaced by a man who'd written my name on a death certificate and planned a vacation to Costa Rica with the payout. I turned away. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 10. We had 8 hours before that plane left the ground. Frank helped David to his feet, and I watched my grandson, my first grandchild, stand shakily beside my kitchen table. "You're coming with us to the airport," Frank said. "If you want to avoid a life sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, and yes, faking a death for insurance money qualifies, you'll help us catch the woman who put you up to this." David looked at me. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I picked up the landline and carried it with me as I walked to the front door. Whatever happened tonight, I wasn't letting go of the one piece of old technology that had saved my life twice now. Outside, the air was cold for early October, and the stars were sharp as needles. Frank's car idled at the curb. David got in the back, hollow-eyed and silent, and I climbed into the passenger seat with the landline in my lap. As we pulled away from Oakwood Drive, I looked back at the house Arthur and I had built our lives in. The light in the kitchen was still on. The pot roast was still on the table. Nothing would ever be the same again. And somewhere across town, Nicole Vance was packing $1 million crime spree into 2 suitcases, unaware that a 74-year-old widow and a beige rotary phone were about to close a net that would catch them all. The Detroit Metropolitan Airport at 4 in the morning is a strange cathedral of fluorescent light and exhaustion. Frank parked in the short-term garage, and we walked through the terminal with David between us, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. We found Detective Ramirez near the security checkpoint, a stocky woman with sharp eyes and a badge clipped to her belt. She'd already stationed plainclothes officers at every exit. The terminal was sparse. A few early travelers, a janitor pushing a mop, the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner. Ramirez briefed us in low tones. Nicole Vance, traveling under the name Linda Brennan, had checked 2 suitcases. Her boarding pass was for the 6 a.m. flight to Mexico City, seat 4A. She was in the first-class lounge, drinking a cappuccino, looking exactly like a woman who'd just stolen a life's savings and was about to vanish into the sun. Frank handed Ramirez the digital recorder with David's confession. She listened to a few minutes, nodded once, and gave a signal to her team. "We take her at the gate. Less collateral, more controlled. And David, you're going to stand where she can see you. I want her to know this is over." We moved like a quiet procession. David walked ahead with Ramirez, his face gray. Frank stayed beside me. I was still carrying the landline. It had no cord now, just the receiver cradled in my hands like a relic. No one asked me to put it down. At the gate, the first-class passengers were already lining up. Nicole Vance was near the front, her 2 designer suitcases beside her, a silk scarf draped around her neck. She was tall, blonde, with the kind of confidence that made you look twice. When she saw David approaching, her expression flickered. Just for a moment, the mask slipped. Then she smiled, wide and practiced. "David, honey, I thought you'd meet me in Mexico." Her eyes darted to Ramirez, to the uniformed officers now forming a perimeter. The smile tightened. "What's going on?" Ramirez stepped forward. "Nicole Vance, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit murder, and elder financial abuse across 3 states." She held up the recorder and pressed play. David's voice spilled out. "Tina promised me she could make it all go away if I just signed a few papers. She said you were old anyway." Nicole's face didn't crumble. It hardened into something ancient and cold. She turned to David. "You pathetic little boy. You couldn't even do this right." Then she ran. She didn't get far. She made it maybe 20 feet toward the moving walkway before the officers closed in. She kicked off her heels, tried to vault over a row of seats, but Ramirez caught her by the arm and brought her down on the polished floor. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed off the high ceiling. Nicole screamed, a string of profanities that turned heads across the terminal. Cell phones came up. A security guard herded travelers back. And in the middle of it all, I stood with the landline clutched to my chest, watching the woman who'd tried to erase me be lifted to her feet and read her rights. One of the detectives opened her suitcases. Inside were stacks of cash, rubber-banded, totaling over $120,000 in mixed currencies. Passports under 3 different names, an external hard drive, and a small leather notebook with a handwritten list of names, 6 other elderly victims, with notes about their assets, their vulnerabilities, their estimated worth. My name was crossed out. Eleanor Morrison, deceased. David was taken into custody as well. He didn't run, didn't fight. He stood as still as a mannequin while an officer cuffed his hands behind his back. Before they led him away, he looked at me. His eyes were red and wet. "I'm sorry, Grandma, I really am." I didn't answer. I had no words left. What do you say to the boy you once taught to tie his shoes, who later typed your name onto a death certificate? Frank touched my elbow. It's over. But it wasn't. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of Nicole Vance's operation came to light. The hard drive from her suitcase contained detailed financial records for a network of shell companies spanning 4 countries. The list in her notebook led investigators to 6 other elderly victims: 3 widows, 2 widowers, and a retired school teacher in Ohio, whose son had been manipulated into signing over her house. All had been targeted through trusted family members, just like me. The FBI got involved. Ramirez held a press conference, and I watched it on the evening news from my kitchen, the landline resting on the table beside me. They called it Operation Silver Shield. Nicole Vance was charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Her lawyer tried to argue she was a victim of circumstance, but the evidence from Arthur's investigation and from Frank's years of work was airtight. She accepted a plea deal to avoid a life sentence, but still got 28 years in federal prison. She will be 82 when she's eligible for parole. David's cooperation gave him a different path. He testified against Nicole, detailing every step of the scheme, every forged document, every lie. His confession was so complete that the prosecutor agreed to reduce charges in exchange for his help dismantling the wider network. He was convicted of fraud and conspiracy, sentenced to 5 years with the possibility of early release after 2. I wrote him a letter once. Just once. I told him I hadn't forgiven him, that I wasn't sure I ever could, but that I hoped he used his time to become someone Arthur could have been proud of. He never wrote back. I didn't expect him to. The annuity was restored. Patricia at First Federal personally oversaw the process, making sure every delayed payment was accounted for. The stolen $83,000 from my savings was partially recovered. About $40,000 came back through asset seizure. The rest was gone, laundered into the Caribbean network. But Arthur's stocks, the $370,000 he'd hidden in the safe deposit box, more than made up for the loss. I paid off the fraudulent credit card. I set aside enough to live comfortably for the rest of my days. And then I did something that surprised even me. I took that landline, the beige rotary phone Arthur installed in 1984, and I had it framed. Frank knows a man who does preservation work for museums. He built a shadow box with a glass front, and inside it sits the phone, the receiver resting on the hook, the coiled cord tucked beneath it. A small brass plaque beneath it reads, "This phone saved my life." I hung it in the hallway, across from the framed photo of Arthur and me on our wedding day. Every morning, I walk past it, and I remember that the past isn't a weakness. It's an anchor. 6 months after the arrests, I got a call I didn't expect. It was Patricia from the bank. She had news about the final missing piece of the puzzle, the $43,000 that had been laundered offshore. The FBI's investigation had traced it to an account in the Cayman Islands, and they were filing for repatriation. But that wasn't the surprise. The surprise was this. Among the documents recovered from Nicole's hard drive was a letter she had written to David but never sent. It detailed her plan to leave him behind the moment the money cleared, just as she'd done to every other partner. She called him expendable. The FBI agent who called me said, "Your grandson would have been the next one on her list of liabilities. You didn't just save yourself, Mrs. Morrison. You likely saved his life." I hung up the phone, the new cordless one my daughter bought me, and sat in the quiet. For the first time since Arthur died, I didn't feel angry. I felt something softer, something that might have been the beginning of peace. Spring came again. The daffodils Arthur planted along the front walk bloomed yellow and stubborn. I hired a boy from the neighborhood to mow the grass. I started volunteering again at the hospital, not as a nurse. My license expired years ago, but as a friendly face at the information desk. I told my story to anyone who asked, and to some who didn't. Elder fraud is a quiet epidemic, and I had become its loudest survivor. The 6 other victims on Nicole's list were contacted. Some of them got their money back. One of them, the retired school teacher in Ohio, called me on a Sunday afternoon. Her name was Margaret, and she'd been swindled by her nephew and his girlfriend. She said hearing my story gave her the strength to turn them in. We talked for an hour. We talked for 2. We decided to start a support group, just a few folks who'd been through the same nightmare. We meet every 3rd Thursday at the community center. I bring cookies. Margaret brings tea. And sometimes when someone new walks in, clutching a pile of bank statements and looking like they haven't slept in weeks, I tell them about the landline. I tell them about the Tuesday morning when a bank teller called to confirm my death, and I answered. I tell them that it's never too late to fight back, that being old doesn't mean being helpless, that sometimes the things we refuse to let go of, the stubborn habits, the old technology, the memories, are the very things that save us. And that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Would you have been able to forgive someone so close to you? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more stories like mine. I still have that framed landline hanging in the hallway. Some visitors think it's strange, a relic from another century preserved like a museum piece. But they don't understand that it represents something bigger than technology. It represents a time when we didn't outsource our memories to devices that forget faster than we do. That phone was a tether to the life Arthur and I built, a stubborn refusal to let the world move on without him. And it was that stubbornness that saved me. Not luck, not coincidence. Stubbornness. The older I get, the more I realize that the things we hold on to, the habits and objects and memories we refuse to discard, are what protect us when the world decides we're expendable. My generation built a country with calloused hands and rotary phones, and somewhere along the way, society decided we were a burden to be managed instead of a library to be consulted. Elder fraud is a billion-dollar industry because it preys on isolation, on the lies we're told that we're too old to understand the modern world. But I understood enough. I understood that a voice on the other end of a copper wire was realer than any digital promise. I understood that my grandson's smile had thorns. And I understood that Arthur, even from the grave, was still protecting me. The support group Margaret and I started now has 27 members. We meet twice a month, and we've helped recover over $500,000 in stolen assets. We've testified at state hearings. We've taught bankers how to spot the red flags Patricia saw in that one phone call. Some of our members come in clutching the very landline phones that saved them, the ancient beige or avocado green relics that connected them to a truth their families tried to bury. We call ourselves the Silver Shield now, not just a name from a press conference, but a promise to each other. If you're watching this and something in your gut tells you the people you trust might not deserve it, listen to that voice. Ask the question. Pick up the phone. You're never too old to reclaim your life. As for forgiveness, I haven't found it for David yet. Maybe I will someday. Margaret says forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not the person who wronged you. I'm still working on that. What I do know is that love and trust aren't the same thing, and the people we love most can sometimes become the people we least recognize. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. It means we fight smarter. We hold on to the one thing they can't predict, the one habit they can't hack. For me, that was my landline. Please share this story with someone who might need to hear it. You never know who is sitting alone in a kitchen waiting for a call that might save their life. And subscribe to this channel for more stories that prove our best chapters can happen at any age. Thank you for listening.